I'm Jim Mitchell. Was born in 1926 to my father and mother, who were a doctor and nurse. We knew early about Little Compton through some good friends of Mock's. And so when we started looking for land for the, well, let me back up a little bit. I had been in the consulting business when I married Lottie, and shortly after, I had to take a trip to Tehran with my client, and on the way, waiting for the return flight just before Christmas, 3 months after we were married. It just didn't come. And what had happened was that the flight number had been blown up in Fiumicino Airport in Italy. Lolly didn't know what had happened, so she wasn't sure whether it was coming for me or whether it had taken me on. And she didn't, I'll let her talk about that. But I eventually did make my way home. And after being jumped in the airport, we decided to do something different. It was time to work for ourselves instead of somebody else. So anyway, I had made some homemade wine, and we thought of 2 or 3 different things we could do. We wanted to do something that was a small business, an art form, and, if possible, a land use. Well, there aren't too many high-end businesses like that. Cheese is one, but we felt we were getting a little too old to worry about a herd. And wine was the other one. And what we didn't realize was how much work wine grapes took. Anyway, we started looking, and I think the real starter was when we talked about it. She said, Lolly told me, she said, well, if you could make it, I could sell it. So that's where we started. We did a sort of a case study of what it would take, and which looked prosperous, possible. When we went to get a lawyer, we ran into Mr. Chafee when he was out of office, before he started to go to the Senate. And he took us on, introduced us to the bank, Royal Hospital Trust, and we started. At any rate, looking for land was one problem. And we we solved that one when we found the land in Little Thompson, and we had hired a consultant who was a retired grape land use specialist, and he agreed this was a good choice. And who was our, who was the real estate person? Bill
Bill
Sheether.
Sheether.
Bill.
All right, wait a second.
Not his name, but
Bill.
it was Sheether, really.
Sheether, and his wife is.
Never mind.
No. She also Dougie Whitmarsh.
Whitmarsh.
And we hired him to find the property for us. So we ended up paying him the commission. It was sort of the normal thing, but in reverse.
And so that led us to this piece of land, which was originally the Clark farm, coming down from 1674. And our consultants, after we reviewed it with him, said, that looks like a very good piece of land for a vineyard. I'm not sure the Peckhams thought so, but we did buy it from the Gomes, and we started. In fact, we actually planted grapes before we really closed on the land. You want to pick it up?
You want to rest now?
Yeah, I'll rest for a minute.
Okay. My name, I'm going to start with the easy one, the nickname is Lolly. Last name, Mitchell. But if you want the whole mouthful, my given name is Lloyd Adams McDonald, now Mitchell. And I will tell you that I'm wife number 3, but we have our 48th wedding anniversary next week.
48.
And I think we might make 50.
48.
48 coming up. I was working, well, let me back up. I grew up in Kansas City, Missouri. I didn't know one grape from another. I went to Stanford University and then Harvard Radcliffe program in business administration, which was a very interesting program. It had started during the war to train women to take middle management jobs while the men were doing the fighting. And after that, I followed a lot of other bright ladies and went to work for Polaroid Corporation. Dr. Land just loved to fill up his lab with bright young ladies. Most of them were out of Smith, but the occasional interloper got in there. But after a while, I realized that Polaroid was not my entire dream come true, and I switched and went to work for a small architectural firm which was located in Cambridge, right across the street from the campus where I had been in graduate school. It was a very unique firm. It started by Walter Gropius, the Bow Wow House architect from Berlin. He had escaped from Nazi Germany on an invitation to make a lecture in London, and he left Berlin with his wife and the clothes on their back. And they never went back until 1956. But anyway, he and a group of his students started this firm, and I worked with them for 18 years. And they were very flexible and let me take time to work with Jim when we got this idea. And they wrote up the cutest little story when I left. They called it From Grope to Grape. So, that's sort of a good little twist. But what we sort of had in common was we knew that we wanted to work together. We knew those three things about an art form and a land use in the small business format made sense. And so we just dove in. I mean, we never looked back, but there were some real tough moments along the way.
We took a real chance.
Yeah, we went to the edge of the cliff and
I
we
jumped.
we jumped. We made a very good friend in our banker. His name was Anderson. What was his first name? And Alden Anderson.
Alden
And we're still in touch with his widow. We had Chafee on our side, and then we got chummy with the Federal Land Bank. And they gave us, Alden Anderson gave us the money that we needed to construct and equip the winery. Of course, they owned it, and they sent down these plaques that said Property of Rhode Island Hospital Trust, and they wanted us to put those on the tanks. Well, ho, ho, ho. The signs were
flat.
horizontal and the tanks are round. So forget the signs, they were in my drawer. And then we cuddled up to the Federal Land Bank and they gave us the money to build the house. And
Well, they gave it the money to buy the land first.
Did Federal? No.
Yes.
No.
Yes. The Federal Land Bank gave us the money to buy the land.
Okay.
That allowed the bank under Anderson to say if you get the land
The long-term money.
long term, we'll fill in around the edges with all your short and medium term cash needs.
And they did.
And they did.
And the way we charmed Dr. John Selesky was we would have him to lunch when we wanted something. And we'd serve him this really nice lunch.
And wine.
And a little bit of wine. And the next thing he said, when do you want the check? We did that at least half a dozen times. So we had a very favorable team. And when we needed some help, how did we find the two nuns, the two sisters?
Oh, they wrote us. We had something came out in the paper about the fact that we'd started this vineyard, and so apparently they saw it and were thinking about taking a year off from being nuns to doing something else. And so they wrote us this very nice letter. And we said, well, fine. So they came, we gave them a car.
And a house.
And a house in the middle of Little Compton.
It was the house that we lived in while we planted. It's sort of right, there's Wilbur Store, there's the church and the commons, the graveyard, and then there's this little itty bitty side street. It was at the end there, and it ultimately got purchased by a woman from Bermuda, and she added on to it, and it lost some of its charm.
Miriam Scott?
Hmm?
Miriam Scott?
No. Miriam Scott was the broker on...
she was a real estate broker.
She was a real estate broker, and we actually got to know her daughter quite well. Miriam Scott once told us that we had built the best house in Little Compton. Quote, unquote. I could go and show you that little house.
Which I did all the drawings for.
Oh, you did the architectural drawings, yes. And we had a very nice architect friend in Boston, a Dutchman, who helped us. And this very big, tall, handsome man drove in one day. He said he just graduated from RISD, and he and his buddy were looking to build something. So he said, well, we just happen to have a house all set for you. I know he was John, and the other man was Sandy.
Can't remember his name.
I can't remember the names either, but they went from our project to one out on a lighthouse that they rebuilt into a residence at Westport Point for a man named Bunt Pounding. Sandy was a glass blower, and by the time we're done, I may remember his last name. But they were the right builders because they really appreciated the design of the house, and they knew we didn't have resources to do everything we wanted, but so they did a great job. And
And this house is the lovely large house on the vineyard property overlooking the reservoir?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. In a French style, is that right? Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So there we were. Now
Oh, our banker said he'd loan us the money for the house, but we should only have one chimney. He wouldn't go for two chimneys. So
it's a huge chimney. I'm trying to even. There's quite a.
Yeah, great.
It really. Carolyn has made some significant changes, and I will be very honest with you. If we had it to do over, I think we would have reoriented it because we didn't have an ability to take advantage of the southwest exposure when
the wind all comes in there, so you want protection for it to some extent.
But you know, we were so busy it hardly mattered. The only time we were in the house, we were usually in bed. So there we were. We had our two nuns. We got everything planted, and then we had to hire another consultant, a gentleman to come and help us make the first wine. And he was a retired winemaker from the Finger Lakes.
Yeah.
Norma was his wife. Can you remember his name?
No.
Well, she would come with him, and she was memorable because most people refer to the harvest as the pressing season. Well, for Norma, it was the pressing season. But, when you think about the labor involved in these projects, and I don't know quite why Carolyn's having any trouble, we used local housewives. They came in droves.
It was all local housewives. In fact, at one point, I was the only man on the place.
And we had 45 to 50 women every harvest for lunch. I mean, at the end, we had a big little...
And there were about 50 women who would come in and join us for lunch.
And they used it as sort of money for Christmas and just extras. And some of them, they would buddy up, that expression, through the grapevine, and they worked in teams. They were good, because we picked by hand. They have machines now that do all that. But we didn't approve. We did it the old-fashioned way. But before long, we needed more help. And we'd had a guest book that we set out in the winery. And we went back to that guest book and read all the names. And two of them were young women who had grown up in Rhode Island but were working in California vineyards. So we wrote to both of them.
And they both came.
One was Bobby Clark, and she became the vineyard manager.
And she's now Bobby Zizer.
And
they live in Tiverton.
Tiverton, yeah. And
And the two nuns left the orders, and I guess we spoiled them.
Well, they went over the wall, so to speak.
Yes, they jumped the wall.
And they went back into teaching. So, and Hannah Sullivan, who grew up in Tiverton, now they live on the other side in Barrington. And I think they're both retired now. We hear from them at Christmas. The other nun was Anne Blumenthal, which is not what the name you would associate with the church, but that's okay. They were wonderful. And then we got Dina Chase, and she took over the tasting room. And Dina had come to us as a single mom. She ultimately married a man who was our winemaker for a brief time. And Bobby married Nick Zeiser, who was a distributor in Providence. So here are these two women working at the end of nowhere, and they both managed to
Find husbands.
find very nice guys. Just goes to show. But the first harvest was 1976. And that was all made from grapes that we had purchased.
No, not entirely.
No, wine that we purchased. It came in
No, not wine, grapes.
grapes. We processed them, didn't we?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. And did we add any?
Yes, we had some of our own.
Okay, but not much.
Not much.
Just a tiny little bit. But we were told by our distributor to get it across state lines as fast as possible to establish our market authenticity. And that was the America's Cup White and the Rhode Island Red.
Red.
And then it just went year after year after year, a very kind of, the work got harder, but the rewards got bigger. I mean, there was a time.
We made a profit, a little bit of a profit, every year except the first one. I don't know how we did it, but we did it somehow.
And we tried a lot of things that we couldn't afford. We advertised on the classical music station. Very expensive. Shouldn't have done that. But you try things and you hope they work. The most valuable thing a small vineyard can have is a good distributor network. And this is where Carolyn has not put any emphasis.
Yeah. And we had
Stanley Fishbine, Town Wine and Spirits,
Town
and then
Wine.
we had Myron Norman in
Myron
Boston.
Norman in Massachusetts.
In Boston, and he was well known and loved and respected in the wine business. And just some wonderful things happened. I mean, just at the end of the first 10 years, I think it was safe to say that we had established the wine industry in New England, and we were the premier winery, vineyard and winery. That is no longer true.
I had also become the head of the Wine Growers Association for all the states except California.
Big job.
Big job. We also established southeastern New England as a wine growing district, which is still in effect. But it takes a government. You have to persuade the government that you can do that. This is right.
Let me tell you about the government. When you make wine, you're fooling around with alcohol, and this introduces you to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. Because we were the only winery and vineyard handy to them, they came and inspected us all the time. You could not owe them over $100 a day. So if we had a busy Saturday, or we had to sometimes pay the tax 6 or 7 times. It was just disgusting. but it was the way they worked. And one time they had sent down this little inspector, and his feet didn't even touch the ground.
But
Yeah, but that was,
we got even with them because after so many times this had happened, I wrote the director and I said, we're a law-abiding,
God-fearing.
God-fearing winery, and we pay all our taxes. In fact, and I said how much money they'd spent on inspecting us, which was more than the amount of money that we paid them for taxes. And that if you didn't inspect us, we would have paid you something more, actually. And so why don't you lay off?
And they did.
They did. They never bothered us again.
They never came again.
But I think the piece de resistance, if you will, is the year the hurricane Gloria came up the coast and knocked out our power right when we were processing the wine. And so instead of a normal, slow bubbling, it was like Vesuvius. We had explosions bursting forth. So we knew we couldn't call it a first-class wine. So we did what everybody does if they want to bury the problems and add a little sugar. So it was a blush wine, red and white.
No, it was blush. Oh,
Blush wine, red, mixture of red and white. And I forget who named it, but it was somebody we thought of it, and it was,
Eye of the Storm.
Eye of the Storm instead of Eye of the Swan.
It was Waldron, Will Waldron, who named it.
Right.
He was a Westport gentleman, and he grew a field of grapes, and we processed his grapes for him. I don't think, there were quite a few little growers around that we.
So this is where Lolly came into her own.
Oh, this is interesting.
Knowing that it's not a wine that would be something outstanding to a wine writer, she sent bottles to the weatherman.
The weather forecasters.
The weather forecaster. And a forecaster who I think just recently died.
He was on Good Morning America, Luther. We were, of course, working in the vineyard. We didn't have any idea this is going on Good Morning America, but he holds up this bottle on Good Friday. It's Good Friday. And by 9:30, there were helicopters coming over our property. And around noon, Earl Sampson walked in and said, I think I'm ready to buy.
Well, no, our distributor said, we'll take 20,000 cases like this, and you could have 1,000 cases to make the wine you like.
And we said, that's not why we're in the wine business. We had fallen in the trap. We wanted to really make first class Burgundian style big wines.
So,
Well, there we were with this big success, and of course it sold out. The town wine cleared us out, but Earl had come at a good moment because I was diagnosed with
Cancer.
Stage 2 cancer in 1950, 60.
And I was
yeah.
getting sick with something I didn't know what was.
Yeah, so we took Earl's offer.
And also looking at it was Pepper's Farm.
Yeah, but we would have been a corporate
We would have been a corporate
property.
offspring. But they didn't jump. And the people, other people were...
Zildjian.
Hmm?
They make trombones.
No.
Cymbals.
Cymbals.
Zildjian.
Let me back off a little bit and go back to the beginnings. 85% of the work in a vineyard is farming. Only about 15% is actual winemaking. And so it's really a farming enterprise, and knowing what you need to know to make the grapes do what they should do. Which is why I said you really need a first-class winemaker to come in, because it's not just what grapes you grow, but it's how you grow them, how much you stress them. And if you stress them enough, they make better wine.
There's a saying that the wine made from the grapes grown at the far north as possible
Is the
best wine. And they make a big deal about that.
So Burgundy, which is very far north.
And they make, New Zealand also specializes in some cold climate viticulture. I will say some very positive things about Earl. He sent the 3 key people, the winemaker at the moment, his wife, who was running the tasting room because Dina had gotten married, and Bobby Zeiser. He sent them, oh no, Bobby had left. It was Joetta.
Joetta Kirk.
Kirk.
You remember her?
I do.
Yeah,
She
Joetta.
was first class.
She was.
Vineyard manager.
I kept hiring these people to help me, and you know what happened?
I took them away from you.
Took them away from me. But anyway, he sent Joetta and these kids all down to a cold climate viticultural conference in New Zealand. I mean, that is big time. Earl also understood money very well, and he put some big bucks into Sakonnet Vineyards. All the equipment was upgraded, and he, it's beautifully maintained.
You go back to the coldest areas, make the best wines, and 2 of those grapes are Burgundy. The red one is Pinot Noir, and the white one is Chardonnay. And they're so far north, in fact, that if you don't get them to really darken the red, they'll turn into champagne the years it doesn't ripen fully. Well, it turns out that Burgundy, both the Pinot Noir and the Chardonnay are probably 2 of the best grapes in the vineyard. The other one being
Vidal
Blanc, which is outstanding in this area and replicates, what's the name of it? Loire.
Well, the Muscadet.
Muscadet. The Muscadet wine.
And
the French say they'd love to grow it but they can't because of the rules in France.
If you drive into Sakonnet when you get back and you go down to the house, the Vidal is along that edge of the driveway, and a really good place to see it is just as you turn in that driveway. The clusters are this big,
Bigger.
and just about now they're starting to turn to this gorgeous
Pink.
golden pink. I mean, and of course we made the wine bone dry, so it became very appealing to
Wine sophisticates.
wine purists, and it went very well with all
Fish.
of that fish, that wonderful local
Oysters.
oysters, clams, and they have that wonderful fish that down in Little Compton that we can't get here so easily. Bluefish. Bluefish. The other answer to your question is the soil. Little Compton soil is decomposed slate, and it's very agreeable for the wine growing. And if you compare temperatures with, say, Providence, Little Compton is warmer.
10 degrees warmer in the winter,
and 10
10
degrees cooler in the summer. But it's the maritime influence. We didn't really, we weren't right on the ocean, but we had the river on one side, the ocean down below, and then that reservoir. I don't think the reservoir was a real factor, and we had some elevation. The grapes all sloped gently in one direction.
down towards the reservoir.
Yeah. It was a very comfortable site, and it had been planted in potatoes, and for years we kept finding potatoes. We're Rhode Island license number one. We're probably federal permit. Well, I think we were number 3. There were 2 vineyards that were getting quite a lot of attention before we got started. One was Shikama Vineyards on Martha's Vineyard. They were gutsy too. And the other one was this man out on Prudence Island. I can't remember his name, but you know, the trouble with a lot of these things is they were hobbies. They didn't really take
They
it.
didn't jump all the way in.
They didn't get all the way off the cliff. Bless her
Is
soul.
that enough of a story?
That's a marvelous story.